building family resources and strengthening resilience.
Yeah.
Okay. Jane is a systemic family therapist and EMDR specialist. Jane is one of our biggest supporters. Yes, our support system at Nafsaniyon since years ago. We are very proud about our friendship, our work together. We want to thank you, and we are ready whenever you are.
Okay. Okay, so Hiba.
Yes.
You're gonna do that introduction then. Yes, in a moment.
Yes, already everyone knows about what we will talk today. Knows about you, so yes. We are ready when you want to start your presentation.
We will translate your intervention later on to the Arabic, and we will publish the text on our magazine.
Yes.
Okay, so you're not translating as we go. We're just going straight in English.
I told everyone no, because it will be very slow like this. We don't.
It'll be too slow. Yeah,
yes.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so when you're ready, you start and just say over to me when you want me to start. Okay.
Yes, it's already 2:15, so we are ready.
Okay, I'm ready too. That's fine.
Yeah, okay, very good. Thank you so much. You may start if you want.
Okay, hello and welcome to this presentation on building resources and resilience in work with families. It's lovely to be with you and a real honor to be asked to present. I'm going to give a very practical presentation. I'm a practitioner. What I do is rooted in a theoretical approach. But what I really like doing is talking about the actual work that we do as therapists and how we can work more effectively, in my case, often with families and with groups. But some of the things that I do are also very relevant to working with individuals. So today I'm sitting at my house in Oxford, looking out over the sunshine. And it's quite a strange experience for me to be talking to so many of you who I don't know. I don't know your experience. I don't know how you work, but I'm just trusting that we can share something useful.
If you want, Jane, I can tell you a little bit about our audience, our participants. Maybe it's better.
Very quickly.
Yes, of course. Our audience are psychologists, sociologists, psychosocial education, all this field. 80% of our audience speaking Arabic, since they are from Arabic regions. So that's why there is a lot of people cannot watch today because there is no translation. They are working on the field, most of them. So that's a brief, yes.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you for that. Okay, so I apologize to Arabic speakers that I don't speak Arabic. I wish I did, but it's a very difficult language for us to learn. So hopefully you'll get the translation afterwards that you can follow. Okay, so in my work as a family therapist, I have worked in many different countries, and I encountered within families who I worked with, some where the experience of trauma had been so severe or ongoing for such a time that my family therapy skills were not enough. So I also trained in trauma-focused approaches, EMDR, narrative exposure, some energy and body work, and some metaphorical techniques for helping families through serious trauma. Today, I'm not focusing on trauma so much as on general family work and working with wider groups as well. And these things are useful for families who have experienced trauma, but they're not necessarily addressing trauma directly. So move one slide down, I hope. What am I going to talk about? I'm a family therapist. That means I work systemically. So I will talk quickly about what it means to work systemically. I'm going to give a quick overview of family therapy approaches. Some of you may already be trained in some of these approaches, and I want to acknowledge them and their usefulness. also it gives you a way, if you want to look up afterwards, it gives you some of the names and the references to look up when you want to find out more afterwards. Today, I'm going to use a narrative lens, particularly, and again, that may be familiar to many of you. I'm going to focus in a positive way on how you can build and strengthen resources and resilience in families. And you'll see on this slide that I've added the word resistance. Now, that's because I've worked a lot in contexts, particularly in Africa, where people are surviving and struggling, as many of you will be in the Middle East, in situations where the context is oppressive, unjust. They feel very disempowered. And in some cases, people have said to me, you should not expect us to be resilient. Why should we have this quality? There's a feeling that it should not be demanded of people to show resilience when it's not their fault that they are where they are, that it's not their responsibility to show qualities when the wider context is one of injustice and structural violence, or sometimes actual violence. So I add the word resistance, and that can be resistance in a very small way to a family problem or something in the immediate context, or it can be wider resistance, you know, in terms of societal resistance or whatever, because I think that's a fundamental part of coming through the depression and powerlessness caused by oppression and injustice, and the capacity to act in some small way to try and change your own situation or to change the wider context is an immensely healing thing for people. The sense of disempowerment, we can't do anything, everything is being done to us, we are victims, is fatal for mental health. People do not thrive when they have no sense of what I call agency, no sense of being able to do anything to improve their lives. And in the context of today's talk, I'm going to show 3 practical tools which I use. And you can look at them. As always, I always say, this may not fit your context. I'm in a completely different context. I've used these tools in different countries in the world. I've used them here. But every time you must think, does this fit our context? You are working in a different cultural context with different beliefs, different systems. And what comes from somewhere else needs to be changed and adapted for your situation. Okay. So when I use the word narrative, what does it mean to me? It's the narrative tradition in therapy, in family therapy, has grown out of the building blocks of family therapy since the 1950s. If I work in a narrative way, I'm always keeping an eye on the wider context in which people bring problems and struggles and difficulties. So that may be their family, it may be difficulties in relationships within the family, it may be things in the wider community, it may be in societal attitudes, or it may be the political context. They are all relevant. I'm not just focusing on what is happening in people's mind. So I'm bringing a psychological perspective, a psychotherapeutic perspective, but I'm expecting also to bring in the context as I work. I'm not the kind of therapist who sits quietly and waits. I am always I'm trained to use questions to bring out multiple perspectives. And you may already be familiar with the idea of circular questions, which is fundamental to family therapy work, in which you build up through circular questioning an idea of what are the patterns and the relationships which are affecting a family or a community group. I take a non-pathologizing approach. I don't use medical diagnostic labels, although I acknowledge that some of them are useful, and some people may need referrals for a particular issue or diagnosis. But my own approach is not to pathologize and to not pretend I know everything. I'm sure none of you would do that, but some therapists and people working in our field like to be the expert, as though they are a doctor, a surgeon of the mind. But the mind is far more complex, and family relationships are far more complex than the concrete things which are dealt with in medicine. So I don't pretend to be an expert in the lives of others. I bring my experience, my knowledge, what I can share, and I look for the family or the groups that I'm working with to bring forth their knowledge as well, and to work with me collaboratively. And then I'm always looking for what we call in narrative therapy the dominant discourses, which may affect the family. So that could be beliefs, cultural beliefs about gender or race or disability or equality, any of those big societal issues impact on a family, and they start to absorb certain beliefs, certain cultural ways of doing things, which may not actually fit for them. So that might be gender beliefs about the role of women or girls. In our society at the moment, beliefs about race are very much to the fore because of what's been happening. And we know that the educational progress, particularly of young Black boys, is fundamentally affected by what they have absorbed about their role and their position in society, in our society. It can be more simple things or more everyday things like beliefs around childbirth, the arrival of a child. There's a dominant belief that that's a really happy, joyful time. And hopefully it is, but for some families, it'll actually be a time of struggle and difficulty. And that discourse becomes subjugated because the dominant discourse is something else. And then people start to feel that it's them that's at fault. They're doing something wrong, and all the problems which follow from that start to follow. So one of the ways I'm working with people is to say, okay, what's formed this belief in you that this should be like this? And actually what you're experiencing is this. That doesn't mean you're to blame. It doesn't mean you're at fault. It's the dissonance between your story and the dominant stories of the society in which you live. Okay, so we're all working in the context of the pandemic, and we're at different stages of dealing with it. And I've no idea how this is being talked about and seen in Lebanon, but in our context, there's a lot of talk about the mental health crisis generated by the pandemic. And people tend to forget that this is fundamentally a societal political crisis. It has generated extreme suffering and distress. People are often very anxious and fearful. They've lost their hope for the future. They may have lost family and close friends. But in the context of what's happening, feelings of distress and being worried and anxious are normal. They're not pathological. You know, we could say almost that it would be pathological if we didn't feel anxiety and stress. So as psychologists and therapists, I think it's not helpful for us to create the idea of a mental health crisis, We need to help people to respond and to look forward to a time when the anxiety and the stress will diminish and to manage it for the present. But for example, with young people here, there's been a lot of stuff in the press about how this is blighting their future. They will never recover. They will suffer anxiety and stress for their lives as a result of this. They will never catch up educationally what they've missed. It's going to really change their lives. And it may change their lives. But if we construct a story about our children and our young people that this is going to be a disaster for their futures, it will be a disaster. This is social constructionism in action. Instead, we need to help children and young people appreciate the situation, are normal. They will pass when things get better, and they will be able to be helped to take what's happened and to come back stronger. So, you know, some of you may have heard me talking before about growing through adversity. The children who've suffered this pandemic will have the capacity, we hope, to grow through the adversity. So in my view, except for a minority of cases, community and family responses to the pandemic and to the feelings generated by it are likely to be helpful and sustainable. You know, we can only all as therapists give a few sessions to individuals, but if we can help families, they will carry this forward and they will help their own children to come through this with strength. And there's been a lot of talk in this country about, during what's normally the summer holidays for school, giving extra school classes to children. And my daughter, who's got school-aged children, one of her children said to her, she's only 9, she said, "It seems as though the pandemic has taken all the fun away from everything." And it's true, you know, they can't go out and do fun things. They can't go out and play with their friends. So to then put them back into school in what would have been the holiday, when they are just able to start meeting friends and playing together again, is unlikely to be a very helpful response for their mental health. They need to be able to have fun. They need to spend time with friends again. They need to be encouraged to meet safely with other young people. There needs to be art and music and play and all the things they've missed before they go back into school for the next school year. They've irrevocably missed months of schooling and they'll never catch up, because already they are starting to catch up, actually. Okay, so in the context of the pandemic, a lot of the issues which come up with families are sharpened and brought to the fore now. This is, I'm going to through this very quickly. It's just showing you the development of family therapy approaches. In case you want to look at this further, you can track all these people on the web and see that many of these therapists were originally psychoanalytic therapists struggling to deal with issues such as schizophrenia and other problems which didn't respond well to an individualized psychoanalytic approach. And you've got some of the key names in family therapy there. I'm talking today about a narrative therapy approach, and I would acknowledge the role of the Dulwich Centre in Australia, who have a brilliant website. I've credited it on the last slide. Loads of resources you can look at. They're very generous in sharing their resources, and it's a good website to look at to get a grasp of narrative therapy and how it's used around the world. So using the narrative approach in practice with families involves, for me, using storytelling. And that can be family stories, it can be stories about what's going on in society. And it enables what are often fragmented narratives to be brought together. And if there has been injustice and abuse, it can enable those stories to be witnessed and heard. And in some contexts, I've been able to work intergenerationally with families. So we've been able to have grandparents, parents, and children, which is immensely rich because you get the stories across the 3 generations, and the families discover things about different generations which they had not voiced and they hadn't realized. Narrative approaches look at identity, how our identity is created through the stories that we tell about ourselves and other people tell about us, and that identity is created in our relationships with other people, people's expectations of us, the way we're treated as we grow up, all those things create our. I will always involve work around looking at the dominant discourses, what's influenced a particular family to believe as they do about themselves, and whether there are things there that need to be challenged in order for the family to shift and see themselves differently. I firmly believe that every family has beliefs and traditions and family resources within it. Even the most difficult, challenging families I've worked with have had this. You may have to dig hard with them to find the resources, but they're there. And when you work with a child on their own, it's quite easy to develop a very negative perception of the family. And then if you meet the family, you start to see something wider. And I think in all the work I've done, I don't think I've ever met a family where they didn't want the best for their children. It's fundamental to who we are, isn't it, to want the best for our children. They may be going about getting it or achieving it in ways which seem to us unhelpful and difficult and destructive, but the intention to achieve the best outcome for our own families and children is nearly always present. I'll say a bit more later about families where there's abuse and violence, but generally families and parents want the best for their children. They don't go deliberately for something else. And telling stories and using metaphor, which I'm going to show you, enables you to help people change their stories, to develop different stories, and to challenge things which may have undermined them and need to stop and be developed differently. When you work with families, I think it's always a good idea to stop before you do it and think to yourself, why am I doing this? What's my intention in doing this? And to question your own assumptions and beliefs before you go and work within a family system, effectively becoming part of that family system. You need to be aware of the assumptions and the beliefs that you bring from your own family life and your own experiences, and that you will bring those things with you, however hard you try not to. You need to ask whether the context is safe enough. Getting people to share things which are deep for them is not always possible if the surrounding context is not safe. If there's ongoing violence and disruption, it's not the moment to start on a storytelling exercise which makes people expose things which may make them feel more vulnerable. You also need to assess whether the family context itself is safe enough. If there's abuse or violence within the family, that needs to be dealt with first and foremost before this kind of work is developed. And as with any therapy, the relationship you have with the family is fundamental. If it isn't strong and you don't feel they trust you, then that's where you've got to start. You've got to build a strong and trusting relationship. Otherwise, narrative work will be crumbling because your relationship is not strong enough. And lastly, if you're going to embark on this kind of work where you are going to ask people to share stories, you need to think, especially in the context where many of you will work, that some of those stories will be tough to hear. They will be distressing to hear. And who's going to be witness to them? You are. So what is your backup? Where are you going to share the feelings that the family stories evoke in you? You need proper backup for this. You need to think carefully if you're working across generations with children and families and maybe grandparents even, who in the family may be going to hear stories that have not been voiced. And are you prepared for the effect of this on them? And are there some stories which some members of the family may not be ready to hear because of age or their mental state or another reason? So think carefully before you plunge in and find yourself with quite challenging and upsetting stories which people want to share. You need to think whether this is manageable and who will witness these stories and what backup is available for you and your colleagues as you do this work. Okay, so now we get a bit more practical. This is my therapy room with the carpet from Afghanistan. And this is one technique which I use when I'm thinking about sharing a story with a family. So you'll see that I've put a rope across the room, and the rope stretches, it winds, because you know, family life is never straight. It goes up and down, it has its loops and its changes, and the rope goes on down the room into the future, so allow plenty of blank rope for the future. And this is a technique, it's taken from narrative exposure therapy, which it's a technique that I owe to them, so I've attributed it at the end of the presentation. It allows you to work with a family or an individual or a group to get an overview of what their stories might be going to be. So you have a bag of stones and a bag of flowers. Now my flowers are artificial flowers because I live in the middle of a town. I can't go and collect fresh flowers every time. If you live in a rural area, you can collect fresh flowers. That's great. So the stones are things which the family construes as negative events. The beginning of the rope is the earliest stages of family life. You can also do this with an individual, in which case it would be their birth. The stones represent negative things, negative relationship events. The flowers are the positive ones. And the size of the stone indicates, if it's a big stone, something which is big for the family. If it's small, something which was distressing but not so big. Same with flowers, big flowers. So here you can see the red flower. Recently, the family has had something red positive in the family. So you map this out with them. And I sit on the floor with them, and I do it with them. They can pick up the stones, they can place them. They pick up the flowers and they place them, and they agree together what they're placing. It may take several sessions if you've got all of a family doing it. With an individual, you can probably do it in 1 hour, hour and a half session. Then I always photograph it on my phone, keep it, and then when the family come back or the individual comes back, I can have it laid out as it was from my phone picture, so that we can pick up where we were. So this will give me an idea of what I'm going to do. If I'm going to use EMDR, it will give me an idea of where the major traumas might be, what stage of life, and how many they are. So in this family, I can see a big stone halfway down the thread. I can see a cluster of small stones coming along, some stones early on in the family life, and then these flowers coming later. So when I work with this family, this enables them to choose the starting points. If I feel the family is very vulnerable and the situation is pretty difficult, I would actually start with flowers I would pick up flowers and say, tell me what this flower represents for you. It was obviously something big and joyful for your family. Tell me about it. So I'm beginning to see where the resources are for the family, which I can help them to build on. And then they and I together can decide whether we want to talk about all the stones or whether that's for a later date. It's a collaborative decision. Okay. And that just summarizes what I've told you. Doing that kind of an exercise helps to integrate the family story. So you may get families who are very caught up in some particular crisis or particular event which has been dominant in their lives. This kind of gives more of an overview. It helps things to fit together better, and eventually it will help the very dominant event to fit more into a story. Sometimes you do get families. I worked with one Somali family who'd come to London, and when they did this exercise with me, they didn't put down a single flower. The whole thing was stones. Whew. So that's obviously quite a challenge, and it instantly tells you a lot about the family story. And we then had to work hard to be able to add some flowers to the rope and the series of stones. And it's nearly always possible. In that family's situation, they had managed to leave Somalia, where there was war, where they'd had terrible persecution from Al-Shabaab, but their mother had shown incredible strength in escaping from where they were, coming out, getting to the UK, and then getting help to get the children to join her. So that itself, you know, is an enormous flower, which they didn't recognize it as that. So the fact that they had escaped, the skills they'd shown to travel, they had had to escape as a young family and get into Egypt in order to be picked up and brought to the UK, the strength that their mother had shown, those could all be put down as flowers on the rope, so that we managed to change from a totally stony story to one where there are strength. The family genogram, another tool which many of you are very familiar with, and you may use it in different ways. When I'm thinking about building resilience and helping families connect with their resources, I would be using the genogram with them. I wouldn't draw it after seeing them. Quite a lot of people sort of scribble a family genogram on paper after they've seen a family to help them remember who's who. I would do it with the family, and I would also be bringing out some of the stories about the effect of race or gender or persecution, which have been part of the family history. So looking quickly at this, squares are male, circles are female. This is actually taken off the internet. It's the genogram of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was president of the US. You can see him, Franklin, born 1882, and you can see quickly from this, he had a very strong relationship with his mother, and his mother, that zigzag line right across, had a very conflictual relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin's wife. You can see a pattern of loss in Eleanor's family, the loss of her brother as a child. In Franklin and Eleanor's own family, the loss of a son who they had named Franklin. You can see in the family of origin, the grandparents, that Franklin was an only child of a second relationship. His father's first wife had died, and his own mother. From this kind of image, you can pick up quite a lot. You can remember family patterns, but you can also develop stories with the family about what has affected them. And what family beliefs are. You know, many families have almost sort of mottos, what we call a motto, you know, like this family, in this family, boys never cry, or in this family, we are always successful in school, or in this family, women are always in support of their husbands and don't expect to play a leading role. All kinds of family beliefs which are implicit or sometimes more explicit, which can be brought out as you do a genogram. And people who were strong and resourceful in the past, who overcame a lot of difficulty, can be highlighted as past role models for future generation. So that's just summarizing some of the things I've said about working with a genogram. And both those techniques, the stones and flowers and the genogram, are good because they, in the case of the stones and flowers, they involve handling an actual resource and sitting down and doing it together. And people can move and change things. Same with drawing a genogram with them. They can contribute to the drawing. They can use colors and different lines and pens to help you do it. I also use stones again, often after doing a genogram or a stones and flowers rope. This is a different bag of stones. Don't get confused with your bags of stones. So this is a bag of stones where I have a selection of some very beautiful stones. You can't really appreciate them on the slide, but some of them are beautiful white quartz or very smooth polished stones. Some of them are rough and broken. Some of them are big, some of them are small. And this technique enables you to focus in and use stones to generate change and understanding of what people might want to change within a family. Just going back again to the stones, I would lay these out with the family, or in some cases with an individual person within the family. If I feel there's somebody who really has not spoken out, their voice is very subjugated in the family, I might do this with them on their own to get more understanding of how they see the family. So they choose stones to represent different family members or other people who are influential in their life, and they can move them around, show who they're close to, show what they would like to change, show who the difficult people are for them and those that they feel really close to and loved by. So it's a way of handling things and bringing out family patterns. I once did this with a family where the woman chose a large and rough stone, I think it was for her father, and put it quite close to her. And I said to her, is there anything you'd like to change here? Would you like to move any of the stones to create a different series of relationships and patterns in your family? And she picked up that big rough stone and she threw it at the door of the therapy room. So it was a very real expression of what she felt about that person and what needed to change. Okay, final third tool, which I'm introducing, is the Tree of Life. Again, something some of you may use already. It's a very versatile metaphor. It's not the only possible metaphor to use, and some metaphors may work better for groups of people. You'll see that the Dulwich Centre use football as a metaphor with young people because that's their world and it really resonates with them. The River of Life may work well. The Journey of Life may work well. Choose something as a metaphor which will resonate well with the groups you work with. With trees, if at all possible, link this to real trees in a natural environment, because people really connect if you look at real trees and how they can resist infections and cuts and diseases and insect bites and all kinds of things. So I'll show you in a minute what I mean. Also allow enough time for this technique. It's not a quick technique to be done quickly. It needs to be done over time. Usually I've worked with groups for 3 days using this. If we couldn't do it for 3 days, we would work over a series of weeks because it allows for a lot of depth. And just to think about the natural resilience of trees. I was out walking recently close to Oxford, and we saw this dead tree, essentially. You can see the dead branches, but it's spring here, and you can see that despite those branches, the tree is still coming again. It's still going to grow this year, despite everything that's attacked it and killed those big branches. Also like to find trees where the roots are exposed. This image shows that well, because the roots are a fundamental part of family work, and using this metaphor and showing how important they are to a tree helps people connect with the importance of roots and identity for them. So why would you use the tree? You might use it to help a family to shift from a single story of crisis to a richer, more complex story. It offers you a chance to both talk and to have a visual representation of what you're talking about. So people can create their own trees and talk about it in stages with you and with family members. It's a bit like, you know, art therapists in your group will be very familiar with the power of working with something artistic. This is similar. You can be quite artistic in creating trees with people. Not everybody takes to it, but it's definitely very important for some people. It enables you to the family, the nurturing figures, the protective figures, the wise figures, which have not perhaps been told. And it offers people the choice to diverge, to put new branches onto the tree, to create new leaves, to think about new fruits. So it's very much dealing with the past, the present, and the future, not getting stuck in a past which may be difficult and destructive for a family, but enabling them to look forward and to move forward. Very practical things. And this is not the only way of doing it. You may have your own way already. I use big sheets of paper for everybody, flip chart sized. I have lots of coloured pens and other coloured papers, other resources if possible, to make it as creative as possible. That may not be possible. Pens are fine, but if you have other resources, bring them in. I divide the paper. I get people to fold their paper into 3 parts before they start: past, present, future. Otherwise, particularly working with children and young people, if you start on the roots, you'll find they've used the whole paper for the roots. There's no room for the trunk and the branches and the fruits. So create the understanding this is going to be in 3 parts and you're going to move through it. You need to be active, talking to young people, to families as they do this. It's not something they'll manage if you leave them to it. You need to prompt with questions and encouragement and helping them pick out things which may be useful for the future. And the way that I've done it, both here and in Africa, is to work stage by stage, to stop and reflect after each stage. So after the roots and the fruit stage. There are different ways of doing it. You don't have to do it like that, but that's how I've usually done it. And I've used different questions to prompt people in response to different parts of the tree. So with the roots, those are the questions I might use. You can add different questions. The Tree of Life in Zimbabwe, who I've worked with a lot, have similar but slightly different questions. You need to choose what's helpful for the families and people you're working with. As you move on to the branches, that's your life experience, the life experience of the family, different questions again. And looking at the trunk of the tree, it's always useful to point out a real tree where there have been cuts, where there may have been parasites, there may have been mice crawling into holes and hollowing things out, but the tree still survives. And identifying people throughout who've supported and helped and cared for family members is part of what you're doing in building up resources. I'm going fast now because I know we're finishing very soon. So the tree, the branches take you into adult life. What strengths have I developed through experience? With children, obviously, this will be slightly different. What are the talents and qualities which I have? And what skills have I learned? And that may be small things, you know, how to be kind to people. I'm good at clearing up after things. I'm good at helping my brothers and sisters. It doesn't have to be big things. And who are the people who support and encourage me now? What resources do I have to draw on? Are there things that I identified when we looked at the roots of the tree in terms of beliefs and values, which I really want to hold on to, which will help me into adulthood? And the leaves and the fruit are what's going to come in the future. You can do this very creatively if you've got a creative group. And if you have time and you are able, you can develop the idea of building a forest of trees together. So when we did this at Freedom from Torture in London, we had about 10 refugee families working on their own trees across generations. And at the end, we brought them all together as families and tried to develop the idea of solidarity. What are the challenges we all face? How can we grow strong together? And can we imagine the fruits which will help our families and community in the future? What are the seeds we are going to plant for the future? Because that capacity to think that your experience, however destructive and negative it may seem, that experience can be used in future in a creative and positive way, especially maybe it can be used to help other people in future. That is immensely healing for people to feel that. The Tree of Life in Zimbabwe train people who have been through torture and violence to run Tree of Life sessions with others. So they have a strong sense of survival and being able to help others. And that's really important. Whatever process you do, however you do it with families or with groups of families, end it well, bring it to a good conclusion, value what they've done, even if it's been quite challenging. Ensure that everybody has had a voice, has had a chance to contribute. If you can work intergenerationally, it's very powerful, but celebrate the courage and commitment which people have shown in whatever they've managed to do. Then a few references. There are masses of references we could put, but some of these are things you can instantly access online. You don't have to find books. I've put some of The Tales and Transformation is a particularly favorite book for me about storytelling, but it may be hard to get hold of. David Denborough has lots of stuff available online. The Dulwich Centre, as I said, has a brilliant website. So those are resources which will help you if you want to investigate this further. So I think we've reached 1 o'clock and I haven't given you any chance to ask questions. I've talked at you, which is something which is terrible, really. But I do hope that you might be able to put some questions in the chat. I've put my email address there, so you can email me if you think I might be able to help you answer some question. I'm really willing to do that and to help out where I can. I'm sorry that I've talked too much and not allowed you time to share your own comments and to talk and ask questions of me. But that's how it is. But please feel free to come back to me or if you've put questions in the chat, I will pick those up.
Thank you so much. What now you can see people in front of you, not like before. I know it's it's a problem not to see anyone. Okay. There is a question. There is two questions actually. If you have time, I want to ask it for you.
Okay. So, is there time to answer questions now, Hiba?
Yes, we are actually done. We are out of time. It's already 3
Yeah, exactly.
But we have
break. So if you have time, I can read 2 questions already.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's fine. If you've got time, that's okay. Just read me a question.
It's okay. 5 more minutes, so we can read a little bit of questions.
Okay, fine.
About, let me check, please. 1 second.
Okay. Should we go and find some lunch?
Yes.
Sweetie, I'll come and see you in a minute. Okay. All right. Okay, so my grandson thinks it's time to finish.
Hello. Okay.
Okay, so did you want to read a question?
I will read one question. I will read one question quickly.
Okay. Do you want to go with Grandpa and have some lunch? Yeah, you go with Grandpa and have some lunch.
We'll go and find the digger downstairs.
Okay. I'll come and find the digger with you downstairs. Okay?
Yeah.
I'll come in a minute, darling. Okay.
Okay. Can we Grandpa now and then go?
It's okay. Granny, I'm coming. Yeah. Okay. He doesn't want to go. Okay. Okay. So can you read the question, Hiba? Sorry.
The technique about the family technique you mentioned before, it's for the whole family or each member in it?
Do you mean for the tree?
See you later.
Yes, for the tree. Yes, tree.
For the tree, I would let each family member do their own tree and then share with each other. Or you could build a family tree, but then you tend to get the dominant view will be the parents' tree. So if you want each person to really have a chance, I would do each one. And when we did this at Freedom from Torture with a lot of families, we would have a session with all the children. So all the children up to say age 11, and then the teenagers, and then the adults. So the children, we'd all be working together on their own trees at an age appropriate level for them. Somebody else would be working with the teenagers, and somebody else would be helping the adults. And then after we'd done the roots, for example, we'd all come together. So as families, so one family would join together. There might be a child with a tree, a teenager with a tree, and a parent's tree, or even a grandparent's tree, if we were lucky. And they would show what they'd all done for roots. And you'd find very different things coming, and interestingly, parents were often very surprised at how much children had put on the roots of people, this is refugee families. So how much the children actually remembered people that they'd left behind. The parents thought they'd forgotten them, but they hadn't. They were there on the roots. So that's a good way of families learning from each other about what they each remember and know. And it's up to them whether they then join it all together and make a big family tree. And that can be a very positive thing. With some families that I worked with, they eventually create a big family tree with all the things brought together. They take it home and they stick it up at home to remind them of what they've done and what they've talked about. And it's like an important sort of symbol for them, really. So it's up to you, but generally I would try and get everybody to be drawing a tree and then bringing them together to share what they've drawn.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was great information, yes. And we will meet soon, hopefully. We'll meet soon.
Yes.
We'll talk soon. Thank you again.
Okay, and sorry about my grandson who's determined to come and see me.
Of course not. We all have children.
Okay, thank you everybody. Lovely to be with you, and sorry there hasn't been more time for exchange between us, but
Next time, hopefully. Thank
yes,
you so
okay,
much.
yeah.
It's a pleasure,
Okay.
Jane.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
bye bye.
باي. يعطيكم العافية جميعا. رح نرتاح نحن وياكم بريك للساعة 5. اوكي، وبنرجع لعندكم.